There are great benefits to leveraging an open source platform like Woo. You can even get involved with the project yourself. There are a ton of active developers, resources, and solutions already out there for just about anything you could think of. Let's dig in on that. Let's also learn a bit more about how and why people are making e-commerce sites. Directly from the WooCommerce Community team, we are excited to be joined by Jonathan Wold. He's here to cover some of the growth areas in e-commerce, including subscription businesses, marketplaces, and more, and how you can tap into those opportunities with WooCommerce. All right, party people, here are e-commerce opportunities for pros in 2021 with Jonathan Wold.
Sometimes as a web pro, it can feel like you're leaving money on the table. Like maybe your scope of work is a little bit off. Maybe you didn't charge enough. Whatever it might be, you end up having just a little bit of that feeling like, something's just not quite right. That's how I've certainly felt in the past. I've spent more than a decade as a web pro, working both as a freelancer in small agencies and large agencies. And I've had that feeling more than a few times. Sometimes it feels a little bit like a squirrel, right? I feel a little bit like a squirrel holding as many acorns as I can and doing the best I can to get those. And yet there's always something that I'm leaving behind. It's just not quite enough. One of my favorite stories of that, it was a couple of years back, quite a few years at this point. I was working on an e-commerce project and I put together a great proposal. Now, I changed my process recently. I decided that I wasn't going to do these big fancy proposals anymore. It was going to be just text-based. And I put together this proposal via email for an e-commerce project, a good scope of work, was pretty happy with it. I put a price tag of $12,000 on it. And I was feeling good. I pressed send to send the proposal off. And a couple of weeks before that, I had added in a new feature to my email system that allowed me to undo an email. It would hold it for about 30 seconds. So I sent the email off and I sat there for a moment and I was like, let me try something else. I pressed undo. I opened up the email, this proposal for this e-commerce project, and changed the price from $12,000 to $15,000. And then I pressed send. A couple hours later, the client came back and accepted the project. And I love this story for a few reasons. On the one hand, it was a big win, right? I had managed to pick up just a couple more acorns and made an additional $3,000. So that was a big deal. On the other hand, though, there was this degree to which I was actually missing a bigger picture. In my focus to try and get just a little bit more, which was great, right? Like I was happy about that win. I actually wasn't thinking all that much about the future. This turns out was a multi-million-dollar e-commerce business that was growing right in front of me. And while I did a good job on the scope and thinking about the technical work, I had ended up missing an opportunity to think about the bigger picture and the real value for the client. That's what I could have done. And that's the opportunity that each one of you actually has. Every time you're working with the client, you have an opportunity to focus not on just the short term and kind of what you're charging and what the scope is, but on the value to the client. And that's a lesson that I've learned since, and learned to ask, what's in this particular engagement with this work that we're doing, where's the value for my client? And in the world of e-commerce, which we're talking about today, that's especially true. So over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about e-commerce in 2020. We're going to talk about e-commerce in 2021. A lot has happened. We're going to look at some of the areas of growth, and then we're going to talk about the WooCommerce community specifically, why it's worth getting involved in, and what that can look like. So now let's talk about e-commerce in 2020 and 2021. According to a report published by Adobe in February of 2021, e-commerce has grown more than 42% year over year, totaling $813 billion, which is quite a lot. There was a big boost that you can see in May that was like 80% year over year growth. And even though it's dropped down, it's still holding at a steady like 20% plus. That's a lot of growth. And January and February of 2021, this year, are already showing more than 34% year over year. Let's take a look at another example of this in the home improvement category specifically. So from April to October of 2020, home improvement received a 60% boost over January levels. And the trend ended up continuing into 2021, with home improvement seeing about a 60% year-over-year growth in January and February. And this is a lot of growth, and this is just one example. And it's not hard if you take a moment to imagine, like, people are stuck at home and they're like, all right, well, this is a good a time as any to kind of work on improving things. That improvement, though, this actually led to a lot of people making the decision to purchase home improvement supplies online, right? Because there's limited access and you can see what you can get access to. So now let's take a look at WooCommerce specifically. According to builtwith.com, which is a website that tracks technology usage across the web, in January of 2020, WooCommerce was powering 2.2% of the top million websites. So keep that in mind for just a moment. By January of 2021, so this year, WooCommerce was at 2.9%. That's a 28% year over year change. And as of March, so as a couple weeks ago, it's up to 3.5%. Now, that may not seem like much, but to put that in perspective, according to builtwith.com, of all the websites on the internet using e-commerce technology, 30% of them are running WooCommerce. The next closest technology is 18%. And so that's a lot. There's a lot that's happened over the past year. And as folks have shifted and made this adjustment to online, what we're seeing is that that's sticking. Let's take a moment to look at some of the different areas of growth. So there's been growth across the board, but these are 6 that really stood out to me. The first is groceries, and all this data is according to, once again, from the report that Adobe put together. The first is groceries, where online grocery shopping has stabilized at 230% growth compared to the pre-pandemic numbers. That's a lot. People have gotten used to buying their groceries online. Sporting goods is 230% higher. It was 230% higher in March of 2020, so right around peak time, just before it. And then by summer, it grew even further to an additional 120%. Hobbies is another area of growth. Craft supplies saw a 370% increase, and puzzles and games, respectively, saw about 250%. Books is another category of growth, where we saw over 170% higher growth than March of 2020. Home improvement is another area we just mentioned, that 60% year over year. And then apparel was another category. Even with people spending more time at home and traveling less, they're still buying clothes, and they're buying clothes online. And that saw about a 22% year over year growth. So why does all this matter? There's a few things that we can take from this as a web pro. First, we know that for many of us, our own shopping habits have changed, right? We've become much more comfortable with buying online. And even as our habits have changed, and for some of us, maybe it's not, maybe we didn't buy much anyway, but for our customers and the customers of the clients that we're serving, those habits have permanently changed. People have become used to buying things online. And because there's a change, that also means that there's a lot of opportunity. On the one hand, there's opportunity to get more wins that are short-term focused, right? Like you can charge a bit more, you can add more scope to your work. But on the other hand, there's even more opportunity to help your clients expand their thinking, right? To think more about the future and how they can take this opportunity, the shift in their customers' thinking, to provide even more value. To give a little bit more perspective on this, I spend a lot of time thinking about the WooCommerce community as a whole. And so I've been able to kind of watch the growth there over the past year. In March of 2020, so just as a kind of a frame of reference for that growth, we had just under 25,000 members in the Facebook group. So we have a Facebook group focused on WooCommerce. And of those, about 6,500 were active. So it's a decent sort of starting point, a good baseline. By March of 2021, so as just a few weeks ago, we were over 40,000 members, and 27,000 of those were being active. In practice, this means that a lot more people Like we're seeing a lot more people make the move to e-commerce, right? And while many of them are doing it themselves, there are just as many looking for help. So on the Facebook group as just one example, we see a lot of questions about getting started. We see people asking for help, customizing. They're asking about what approaches to use. They're asking for recommendations. There's a lot of interest. And as people recognize that, there's an opportunity here. My customers' behaviors are shifting and changing, and I want to do more to make the most of that. Let's talk now about how you as a web pro can make the most of all this. What does this mean for you? What are some of the things that you can do with this as a web pro in 2021? What are some of the opportunities available to you? There are 5 areas that really stand out to me the most as I've considered this and looked at what I'm noticing in the community and just in general. The first area is what I'm calling like the offline to online transition, right? That touches on a lot of different things, but for many of the clients that you'll serve within this e-commerce realm, they'll have an offline business, right? A storefront. It can be any number of things where the most of what they do is online. And when you make that transition, there's quite a bit to consider, right? If you're really going to bring the two together well. On the one hand, you have examples of things like online ordering, right? The quote unquote simple act of adding online ordering capability to an offline business. The moment you introduce that though, you need to now think about things like inventory management and how you can keep inventory in sync across endpoints, whether it's online or offline or maybe you have multiple locations, right? Another great example is the introduction of things like curbside pickup. If you're working with a business that perhaps is in food service, they may have wanted to add curbside pickup or delivery. And there's a fair amount to think about and a lot of opportunity there to help them make that offline to online transition as smooth as possible. Another area of another opportunity to put all this into practice is in conversion optimization. Conversion optimization, I describe it as like the art and science of reducing friction, right? So you put together an e-commerce website for your client, and your goal as a web pro is to figure out how to make it as frictionless as possible for the customers that your client is serving. There's a lot of different aspects of that. Some of the most prominent include performance optimization, right? Like how do you make it load as quickly as possible? How do you reduce the friction that can come from a slow loading website? How do you make it as performant as possible on a mobile device? Like how do you reduce the friction of checking out and interacting with a cart, etc., through mobile? That's a big area. Folks will oftentimes create a great desktop experience, but if you don't think about the mobile experience, there can be a lot of friction there if someone's wanting to order something. So thinking about what's it like for someone on a mobile device to interact with this business. Another area where you have opportunity to provide value to clients, especially here in 2021, is on the operations side of things, right? So you're putting together a website for them, but for a business with an e-commerce component to it, there's going to be a lot of different moving pieces of the puzzle, right? There's a lot of things happening behind the scenes, and there's a lot of opportunity to use technology to help improve operations. And the heart of this, like the value proposition there, usually comes down to more than anything of helping save money, reducing the time that it's taking them to do things, which ultimately gives them the opportunity to provide more value to their clients, right? This can look like any number of things. In general, it's about how do we make things more efficient, and within the context of a website and WooCommerce, for instance, it's going to be a lot more about workflows and how do we make the workflow from purchase to fulfillment and support as smooth as possible? How do we make sure that we get the information where we need it to go? And WooCommerce out of the box takes care of a lot of that, but there's a lot of opportunity to customize that and really fine tune it for your clients to get their operations as efficient as possible. Integrations is another good example. They might have other additional systems, back office systems of any type. And with WooCommerce, you can figure out ways to integrate that and make it as smooth as possible. And what I like about this, like operations in general, is that it really requires you to do it well, to focus on understanding their business and where the value is. So this can be a great area of growth and a great opportunity for you as a pro to really support your clients and create more value. The last area that I want to focus on for today is, I think about it as like new business models. For a lot of the clients that you're serving, so they'll have an existing business. They may be starting something from scratch, and we can talk about both, but for someone with an existing business, all of this transition to online can give them an opportunity to perhaps try something new. They might, for instance, experiment with a subscription business for the first time. Maybe they're a traditional like offline retailer. They've been making food or some kind of good, and they see an opportunity to experiment with offering a subscription where people can order and have them drop shipped or have them sent to them, etc. So there's a lot of opportunity there to bring a new business model into the mix. Subscriptions is one example. Abstracting out and facilitating the bookings can be another one, like making it easy for someone to book something online and pay for something in advance versus calling, and just kind of making that as streamlined as possible. One of the ones that I think is also a lot of fun and has a lot of opportunity is marketplaces. With one of the sad effects of the pandemic was a lot of farmers markets getting shut down, right? And some of them made the transition to having virtual farmers markets. And I think that well represents a category of opportunity where you as a web pro can be working with your clients to bring an entire marketplace to life, which can take any shape and form. But in general, it tends to have a particular audience focus in mind, and it tends to bring together multiple providers for that audience. And that can bring about an entirely new business and a new way of creating value for your clients and for the customers that they're serving. So those are some of the areas that stand out most to me as I'm looking at the e-commerce opportunities in general over 2020 and 2021. And those are some of the areas where I would encourage you to look. And for you as a pro, I have a couple of pieces of guidance to offer. The first is as you're looking at e-commerce broadly, and as you're looking at these opportunities and areas of growth, just be curious. Be as curious as you can be, right? Ask questions, spend time to really understand your client's business. Sometimes we can end up being a little bit too short-term focused, right? Like just trying to get a few more acorns here and there. And there's so much opportunity to be curious and just show a genuine interest. Like, how does this work? Like, why do you do this way? And not from a place of judgment, but from just a place of genuine curiosity, like that your client has figured something out, and you as a pro, by exercising that curiosity, can lead to so many things that you wouldn't have expected otherwise, right? And within this context of customer behavior changing, of people becoming much more used to purchasing online, I think that curiosity holds more value than ever, right? Because people are willing to try things that they weren't willing to try before. They're willing to consider new possibilities. As you're working with your clients, I would encourage you to ask questions like, have you considered this? What have you thought about that? And the why can be just a great question. Oh, well, why do you do it this way? And when you're coming from a place of curiosity, then I think you'll find that clients are happy to fill in those blanks and give you more context, because I think they recognize that it's going to help you provide them for more value. The other thing that I would recommend is to look for and save examples of e-commerce businesses as you're going along, right? Like when you find an interesting e-commerce website, they're doing something interesting. Maybe they've optimized, they've reduced friction in a particular way. They've done something really efficient. They've done some really nice touches for a customer experience. Maybe they've done the offline to online transition really well. Save those examples. As you're talking to potential clients, what I found really helpful in my experience is having those examples ready where you can show a client and they can say, oh, I can see that. I can see how I could do something like this. So as you're following your curiosity outside of that client interaction and just in general around the web, pay attention, even your own purchases, things that you're doing. Save those and keep those as references as you're working with clients. You can bring up an example of a subscription business, for instance, and then have an example ready to go that you've shared with them. And I'll talk a bit more about community in a moment, but the WooCommerce community can be a great place to get examples. On WooCommerce.com, we have a showcases section where there's just a bunch of different WooCommerce sites, and there can be some good inspiration there. All right, so let's talk now about the WooCommerce community. What is it? We have a mission at WooCommerce, which we describe as the mission, put simply, is democratize commerce. That's the work that we're doing. What does that mean for us? Democratizing commerce, kind of oversimplified, is how can we make commerce more accessible to everyone? And we do that in a few different ways, right? We do that through education. We do that through great open source software, and we do that through community. And all of that, and for community, which is what I'm going to focus on, our focus is we want to create a thriving ecosystem that empowers store owners, your clients, to grow their businesses more effectively. That's what we're about. That's how we believe we can most effectively carry out the mission. We want to democratize commerce. To do that, we need to empower store owners to grow their businesses more effectively. Open source software is a big part of that. Education and community are other critical pieces to making that really work. Within the work that we do in community, we think a lot about values, and we have 3 key values that guide our efforts. The first is inspire. We want to inspire store owners, your clients, with what's possible, right? Through storytelling, through giving examples. We want to help them see within this world of e-commerce just what they can do. The second is to empower. We want to make it as easy as possible to move from inspiration to action and do something with it, right? That's where the education really comes in. That's where the open source software really comes in, to let them do the things that they want to do. And from a management perspective, and for you as a web pro, to give you the flexibility to create the experiences that you want to create. And the last value is to include. This is this idea of lowering the barrier of entry. We want to make it as easy as possible for someone to get started in their language, in their region, with their level of experience. And that's where a lot of this focuses. A lot of our work is to make it as beginner friendly as possible, right? No coding experience required. What can we do to make it as easy? Easy is not the right word. To make it as accessible as possible for those who are willing to learn and have that curiosity, right? So our overall focus in the WooCommerce community is that we're working to create a thriving ecosystem that includes you as web pros, that empowers store owners to grow their businesses as effectively as possible, more effectively, right? That's what it's about at the end of the day. What can we do as a community to empower store owners to have success? That's how we carry out the mission. Now, there's a few different ways that we do that, different spaces where community happens, right? The first is the Facebook group that I mentioned earlier. That's growing fast. That's a lot of people asking questions and sharing with each other. And that's a great place to get a sense of the WooCommerce community at a kind of more global level, right? The second, and one of my favorites, is meetups. We have meetups happening all over the world, both virtual, primarily virtual at the moment, and in person. And a meetup is a fantastic place to be able to go and connect with folks, and in a smaller group setting, and to help each other, to answer questions. And they're happening all over the place. Our meetups have become increasingly more focused on entrepreneurship and e-commerce, commerce broadly. We still have meetups, and we're seeing more all the time that are focused on the how-to, but we're doing more to focus on how do we teach e-commerce. And for a lot of the folks showing up, these are folks who are going to become future clients of yours, right? They're wanting to get started. They're getting started. They're getting the confidence to work with WooCommerce, and then they're getting something up and running. Eventually, they're going to need help with it, and that's where you as a web pro come in. So there's some context for what the community is. Why should you get involved? What's it worth to you? There's a few things. First, there's the uniqueness and specialness, as I think of it, of open source as a whole, right? Like WooCommerce is part of the WordPress ecosystem. And when you use open source software in any way for yourself, for your clients, you're now part of that ecosystem, right? Like you have ownership in it. And when you own something, it's good to get to really know it and to understand like the ins and outs of it and how it works, and because it's yours. And that's the thing with there's a lot of great proprietary platforms out there, but at the end of the day, those platforms are theirs, right? You're renting at best. With open source, you can really take ownership of it, and to really get the most out of it, it's worth getting involved more and kind of understanding the ins and outs. And that's something that we recognize in this ecosystem, that there's this sense of shared ownership. Getting involved in the community is also a great chance to get to know your customers, right? To gather more insight and perspective, to just gain a stronger sense of empathy for what they're going through. It's a great opportunity to make new connections, to meet new potential partners. Many of you I know already do this as web pros, but oftentimes, especially when you're first starting out, you're going to work with others where you have an area of specialty and they've got theirs. And being a part of the community can be a great way to find other web pros doing similar things and complementary things where you can help each other and work together on things. Another reason to get involved in community is that it's a great opportunity to just always be learning, right? There's so many opportunities to follow your curiosity and discover things that you didn't know about. Within the WooCommerce ecosystem, as big as it is, like there's new things coming up all the time. People doing really interesting applications, bringing new technology into the mix, new integrations. I'm always learning something new. And that learning is invaluable for you as a web pro. Always more things that increase the value that you're able to bring to the clients that you're serving. As a web pro, you know that there's more opportunity than ever for you to bring value to your clients within this context of this big world of e-commerce. Be curious and stay focused on that value for your clients, helping them expand and get more out of what they're doing and bring more value to the customers that they're serving. You're going to do incredible, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you build.